The Mini Cooper EV. I've only done a handful of electric vehicles on this channel, and that is because of the region I live in, and also there are not a ton of electric vehicles that are true replacements for their internal combustion counterparts yet, trucks, SUVs, and cars. So as we transition into more electric vehicles like this Mini, which is still kind of a beta project, I'm going to cover kind of the pros and cons of this and what it's like to drive and some of the technical information that you're probably going to want to know. Oddly enough, this is my first Mini Cooper video, and I'm glad it's an EV. It's a sign of the times. Now, the Mini Cooper SE, or the electric version, is around $30K base, or $30,000, and with a federal tax credit, that might be a good value for some. When you add the Ioniq package here, which is like 7 Gs, it's adding some things that most people want, including the Harman Kardon audio that will transform this experience from basic to a little bit more enjoyable. Now, the interior design is kind of retro modern. You have the chrome door handles, some of the interesting plastic integration that's piano gloss, unfortunately, here. The carryover from the exterior color, or the electric green, or whatever the hell you want to call it, that shows you that it's an EV. Then you have toggle switches, which are all chromed out. Again, it's this throwback, trying to give you a little bit of character that a lot of the compact cars have lost in their quest to become upscale everything. Now, the center stack layout is kind of the most interesting part of this car. The volume knob, if you have it enabled, will turn this rainbow effect or LED light to show you what the volume is in this sweeping motion. It also uses different colors in here to kind of show you what drive mode you're in. And of course, when you're using your backup parking sensors, if you're close to something, it will go red here. So there's interesting use of the electronics and lighting to make this feel, again, more special or interesting than it is. The gauge cluster is an LCD display, and it's very easy to read and understand how much battery you have left when it's charging or regenerating, but everything else in here is pretty traditional. Now, it does have a phone storage in the armrest. Storage space is pretty weak. I'm going to be honest, the door pockets don't hold any bottles of water, or it's basically going to hold a small wallet or your face mask at this point. You have a shifter that is straight out of a BMW. It's a digi-stick, and the 2 cup holders in front. Again, this is very traditional Mini stuff. If you've ever been in this car before, or any other cars, you're going to feel right at home. But the biggest surprise about this is, yes, it's a 2-door, and you look at the exterior proportions, you're like, this thing is going to be a clown car. When you get on the inside, you can be a really big person and fit in here, at least in the front, extremely comfortable. Passenger space, it just feels like a much bigger car than it really is. The back seats are completely compromised, and it's clear it's compromised so you have more room in the front. Basically, if you're going to use this, you're going to put those back seats down and have more storage space in the back. But let's take a look at the hatch. Now, before I open the hatch, of course, there's some things they've added here so you know you're driving an electric car, like these green emblems with the plug and the charging port, and of course, the crucifix wheels. When you get back here, it's like every other Mini Cooper S you've seen. The battery is placed underneath where the fuel tank traditionally is, so you don't lose any cargo capacity, which is great because this doesn't have a lot to begin with. Once the seats are down, it's a much more usable car if you're a single person or if you have a relationship. It's more of a city car, but I could see most people really enjoying driving this because the proportions aren't ridiculous like every other car that's out. Well, let's head into the shop and talk about some of the technical stuff. Underneath the Mini Cooper EV, this entire car is built on an older architecture, the UKL1, which was front-wheel drive only, something that BMW used on a majority of these cars. They have since updated it to the UKL2 platform, which will be probably the future of this. The problem with the UKL1 was it wasn't designed for hybridization or pure EVs. They've had to retrofit some of that. So in the case of this car, it was somewhat of an engineering exercise and more than likely an exercise in getting an EV for California regulations and emissions overall. They don't plan to sell a lot of these, so they've taken what they had in the Mini Cooper S and they replaced the fuel tank and put in a lithium-ion pack, one that does not have as large of a capacity as the i3 BMW. The i3 BMW, however, is built on their rear-wheel drive architecture with carbon composite, all of that. This has none of that stuff, but it shares a similar drivetrain, a single reduction gear transmission, and an electric motor that is capable of delivering about 200 horsepower. So let's take a look at some of just the underneath here briefly. This is all steel with the exception of the aluminum knuckle. They put the center tunnel is covered up because of the wiring looms. You have aerodynamic panels all over this, and this is the huge benefit of having a pure electric car. You don't have to worry about drive shafts. You don't have to worry about running or plumbing exhaust. This is just as good as you're going to possibly make this generation of a car without completely redoing it like they're going to have to for the next gen. Let's take a look at the back. In the back, you're going to see what you see on all the Minis, a multi-link rear end. It's pretty compact. And it has to be because of the size of this vehicle, but the main thing to look at is all the body adhesive that they've spackled over this entire center section of the car. When you look at it, you're like, oh, it's just a panel. But this helps to reduce the probability of moisture getting inside these panels. It creates a seal, and then it also has the double benefit of reducing some road and tire noise. So again, having a pure EV gives you the ability to flatten all this stuff out, to create less road noise. You don't have to do as much work on NVH reduction as well, because you don't have the harmonics of a vibrating internal combustion engine and all the moving parts of a transmission with multiple gears. So while in some cases we might argue, well, this is kind of compromised because of the battery pack design. Yes, it is. This generation car is absolutely compromised, but you can see where the future of these cars is going. Now, the last thing to talk about is you might think, well, you have to do less maintenance, and that's true. You don't have to worry about a transmission, all the oil that goes along with that. You don't have to worry about the internal combustion engine process, but you still have a brake system that needs to be serviced. You still need to do brake pads and rotors. And while you may not use these as much, if you're in the Midwest, you're going to have to deal with corrosion. Since the brakes aren't used that much, you might have sticky calipers. You might have more rust-prone components that need to be dealt with. You still have coolants you have to change. You still have brake fluid that's in here. So there are still maintenance items that need to be done. There are still consumables with electric cars. And we're going to talk more about this when we do the Tesla videos. But enough of the talk about the underneath. Let's take this for a drive and see how it does. Oh yeah, the Mini Cooper EV. Got 75 miles range. Flip it to sport. Ooh. Yeah, that's quick. Needs some fake engine noise though to really set the mood. There's nothing to hear, just a slight whir, and that is about it. This feels, the EV, the electric motor in here, and the transmission perfectly suit the character of the Mini Cooper. In fact, driving this around at first, I'm like, this is a straight gimmick. You know, the range is a joke. You can't really use it. And I forced myself to use it, and I forced myself to even deal with the slow charger from just a standard wall outlet where it takes you over a day to charge this thing from full. And now that I've whipped it around, I've beat on it, I enjoy this so much. And one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is because we've seen a decline in the fun factor of four-cylinder smaller cars. Every four-cylinder now has to be compromised to meet emissions, fuel economy, and they have all gone turbocharged, which adds so much complexity, and most manufacturers are just like, how do we meet the target numbers? How do we meet the spec sheet numbers? And they're just not all that fun to drive. They sound like crap now because you don't have any naturally aspirated motors left. Manual transmissions are dying. So what you're left with is essentially the most boring experience possible. This fixes a majority of all those problems with the modern internal combustion cars. I guess the question is, how does it fix it? Well, one, it's way more quiet. It's almost silent. With the, of course, you have road noise and tire noise and all the traditional things that seep into the cabin, but you don't have drivetrain noise. And to me, that's one of the best parts about this. The second thing is you have this sense of refinement and you have a ton of torque, and it's torque that's not insane like you see in all these videos where EVs just throw you back in your seat and you giggle like a little schoolgirl. That's not what this is about. It has the right amount of torque at any mile per hour, whether you're going 35 or 55, you just nail it, and it picks right up and gets you to where you need to go instantaneously. And that's something that any four-cylinder that is at least eco-design cannot do. Now, of course, there are some negatives about having all of this power going to the front wheels. It heavily relies and leans on the traction control and the stability control system. Once you turn that off, which I will do right now and come to a stop, what you're gonna get is this super annoying torque steer effect. Pulls left and right, and it almost creates a wobble, which is exacerbated when you're turning and full throttle. And again, it's just a limitation of having all of this torque and power sent to the front wheels. And clearly, this is a car, like we talked about in the shop, that was never designed to be a pure EV to begin with. It's more of an experiment. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad to drive. In fact, it is, it really is great. Aside from the whole torque steer thing, it rides great, it accelerates amazing. And most of the time what I'm doing is I'm driving it in green mode. And there's three drive modes, essentially. You have Green Plus, which turns off your air conditioning, heated seats, and some of the electronics. You have Green, which is battery saving mode. You still get lower fan speed, lower air conditioning operation, but it's a good balance and you still get enough of the power. Mid is like normal, and this is what you're gonna be using most of the time, and Sport. When you launch it, to me, it feels similar in pretty much every mode except Green Plus, where the throttle response is lessened. There's a whole bunch of things that it's doing electronically to kind of save as much battery as possible. But, you know, with a 110-mile range, if you're in the city, you're not going to care. And if you're in the burbs or like in a rural area like me, it becomes more of an issue. However, this also has something very unique, and, you know, obviously EVs are doing this, and what I call it is brake by throttle. When you lift off, the brake regeneration on this car is so aggressive in the high mode that you legitimately never have to use the brakes. And that is something that takes a little bit of getting used to, but the good thing is they have a toggle. You can choose low regenerative braking, which feels more like a manual transmission when you let off the throttle, or you have high. And the whole point of the high is to regenerate electrical power when you lift off the throttle. And the throttle lift is so aggressive that you lurch forward. I'm not kidding. It's like you applied the brakes. And it's so aggressive that it actually turns the brake lights on when you lift off the throttle. So again, this is a very different experience from a traditional car, but it's almost completely seamless. There's no real transitioning from your mental state of driving a regular Mini Cooper with a four-cylinder to this, and this is pretty much better in every single way except the range. The suspension travel and suspension control is great. You don't notice the extra weight here at all. It feels balanced. It doesn't understeer like crazy. It doesn't have any strange handling characteristics. It doesn't crash over bumps. And combined with the fact that this is a super comfortable cabin in the two front seats for larger people, if you can live with the fact that you're only getting essentially a 100-mile range with this and you're going to be charging it all the time, and you don't need a ton of range, you're gonna love this car. If you love Mini Coopers, you're gonna love this. It really is such a joy to drive, but it just leaves me thinking to myself, I'm gonna save that for the final thoughts. Let's head back into the garage and talk about the pros and the cons. Final thoughts on the Mini Cooper Electric. Now you're going in knowing a few things. One, this is definitely compromised by its range. With only around 110 miles fully charged, you're not going to be going a lot of places. And that's going to stick you into a bubble of only staying close to home, or if you're in a city, it makes a lot of sense because of the size. But if you're in an urban environment, this becomes more of a second car, and that's kind of how I treated it. As a whole, the Mini Cooper S has always been a very enjoyable car to drive, and the EV just takes it to the next level. One of the biggest knocks on Mini Coopers from the early days was drivetrain reliability. There were always just these weird things going on with them. And like I talked about in the drive, 4 cylinders have kind of gone downhill with all the regulations, all the things, and all the complication they've had to bake into them. So this is a great look at what we have to look forward to in the future. However, the UKL1 platform that this is on was never designed to be an EV. So again, like I talked about in the shop, this is kind of an experiment for them to move into the next generation. They're trying to gather as much data as possible and see how this goes, along with meeting all the regulations and all the other things they have to deal with. Suspension's great. Drivability is great. Comfort in the front 2 seats is amazing, and there's just a little bit of cargo capacity to make this the ultimate single-person, progressive single-person's car. I really enjoyed driving this a lot more than I would have anticipated. If you're interested in it, definitely take it for a test drive. I mean, it's not going to beat out Tesla and some of the other companies that give you more range, but it is what it is. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.